Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast presented by The Podcast. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. It has been a relatively calm few weeks for Ohio State. The latest recruiting quiet period, which means players can visit campuses around the country, but coaches and schools can't visit them, etc., ends today, Wednesday, July 31st. We enter another dead period starting tomorrow. That means, for all intents and purposes, recruiting is done until September 1st, Andrew. And that means a lot of kids will be making decisions in the next few weeks. And that means David Sanders and his decision comes fully into the spotlight. We're not going to waste a bunch of time here trying to sugarcoat the situation around Sanders. He obviously did not visit Ohio State in this past week. He did visit Tennessee and Nebraska. There was a lot of buzz about the Cornhuskers immediately, like Friday night into Saturday morning. That fell apart and dissipated pretty quick. And now it's back to where things were prior to those visits. And that's Ohio State and Tennessee battling it out for the country's number one ranked offensive lineman. And as you would expect, I guess, in some ways, Andrew, like the last visit went to Tennessee. And so because of that, it looks like people are starting to feel a little spooked, a little bit of momentum happening for the Vols. How are you feeling? Because I just want to know, as the voice of the fan, why are you freaking out so much?
Well, I'm not really freaking out. I just kind of have this feeling of
Are you sure?
Yeah, we won't show the screenshots of my text messages to you. I don't know. Like, it just feels like deja vu. You know, we've been through this so many times. I'm not one of those people that thinks the last visit is the end all be all. But a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about who he might visit during that little short window, we talked about maybe like Nebraska and Georgia, like perhaps the like third and fourth teams on his list. And if you're an Ohio State fan and you saw that last one go to Tennessee, that's not a good feeling. That shouldn't be giving anybody any sense of optimism. I guess the lone hope that I kind of have is just the way he's sort of handled this recruitment, you know, very meticulously and that kind of thing. So I don't think it's a recruitment where that last 12-hour visit or whatever it was is going to be what nails things in favor of Tennessee. But I don't know. I would have liked to see him get back to Ohio State. The vibes coming out of the weekend are not good. Is it just because, is it the typical post-visit buzz, or is it because that's the way the decision's trending? I don't know, but it's hard to be optimistic right now. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State wanted him to visit. They tried to get him and his family to visit. They decided not to, but it's not as if the Buckeyes weren't having conversation with David Sanders and his family about doing so. The difference is Ohio State was not having a large event, a recruiting event. We talked about that a few weeks ago, and we said at the time it seemed like a bad decision. But again, it didn't preclude him from visiting, and it didn't stop anybody else from visiting. The Buckeyes did host some players last week, a couple of defensive backs from around the state and the Pittsburgh area. So, I mean, they opened campus up if people wanted to visit, but they weren't pushing for the big, let's hang out and sing Kumbaya and all that stuff that, other schools were doing. Again, whether or not that's a mistake, we can probably dissect further down the road, but it doesn't matter because it's already over and done with. The Buckeyes are comfortable where they are at in their recruiting class. They did not have the players on campus this past weekend, and they like to have players come into town with the current players on campus in order to give more perspective and to be able to show and put the brotherhood a little bit more on display. There's 1,000 reasons that you can be told why it didn't happen. None of them are going to matter if people want to be upset about it. So sort of continue litigating it, but it gets made worse. It's exacerbated by the fact that in an interview with I believe it was the Nebraska on 3 site, Sanders specifically said, well, Ohio State didn't have an event this weekend, so I came to Nebraska. I don't know why that was said, because I don't think that the two things are related. He still could have went to Ohio State if he wanted to visit. But regardless, the Buckeyes did not have an event. And I think the one thing that really could change in these very short visits at Nebraska, number one, this was an opportunity for him to get around the players in their program because they were not there during his official visit. And for Tennessee, which is just basically a stop on the way home from Nebraska, it is a opportunity to finalize or to further materialize what the NIL situation is and get a real sense of what the offer is. There was conversations on what's today, Wednesday. So Tuesday night, started getting some messages from folks that know people in the Tennessee program that said Tennessee's very confident that they did what they needed to do and that they were able to present an opportunity that the Sanders family would be foolish to turn down. And I think that other people around the recruiting industry must have received similar messages on Tuesday. And that's why, as of Wednesday morning, you start to see a lot of the Tennessee surging. From an Ohio State perspective, the question has to be, is what Tennessee presented able to be matched, or is the conversation over? And that's the hard part. From talking to people in Columbus on Wednesday, they don't believe the conversation's over. So I think that this is still in progress, but to suggest that Tennessee doesn't maybe have a little momentum right now would be false, because they probably do, but that's what happens when you have the last visit. I am trying to not wear the tinfoil hat about things. And we've joked a lot on this show and, and message boards and everything, as long as we've known each other. When you see kids wearing logos and so, like David Sanders and his most recent Instagram posts, every time it's him wearing Ohio State sleeves or Ohio State gloves or whatever. And I don't like, that doesn't matter, or does it? And this is the problem. The game has changed so much that it's very difficult to infer actual intentions from people's actions. I think he's probably wearing the Ohio State stuff because it looks best with his team's uniforms at Providence Day School in Charlotte. It's similar color structure. So I think it's probably more related to that. But the Buckeyes have had a very, very good relationship with David Sanders, and it's not a matter of him not liking Ohio State or going to Tennessee and deciding it's over and calling the coaches in Columbus and saying, well, you're out, because that has not happened. There are 18 days left until he makes his decision, and there are going to be a lot of ups and downs probably between now and then. But what is known to me is that Ohio State is not going to back off. Ohio State is not going to throw up a white flag. They're not going to concede. This is a situation where I have been told multiple times, they will do whatever it takes to make sure that they are not being outdone in this recruitment. So will that matter? Is that actually true? Is there a point where it stops? I don't know, but we are still 2 weeks away here. And it feels like, to me, 2.5 weeks away, this is just really now getting started.
Yeah, I guess the only thing left to say for me is, if it gets to be August 17th and the kid commits to Tennessee, I hope we don't have a bunch of people saying that Ohio State just got outbid and it was an NIL loss, the Justin Scott or some of those, because you and I have been on here for the last month or two talking ad nauseum about how they're not going to get outbid in this one. And if the kid ends up picking Tennessee, or hell, even Nebraska, I think you just chalk it up to a loss for whatever. I mean, whether it's I wouldn't put it as an NIL loss. It's just a loss, plain and simple.
I would probably agree with that, unless he picks Nebraska, because I don't think that it's not like to like. Tennessee, despite the fact that they haven't made the playoff in this new era, or the most recent era, in the new era of college football, and this will probably piss off some Ohio State fans when I say it, but I don't know that there's ostensibly a major difference between Ohio State and Tennessee. Tennessee is going to be a program under Josh Heupel that is going to be contending for a playoff berth most years moving forward. So if we assume that the top five teams in the SEC make the playoff, I think that Tennessee is going to be in those conversations a lot of time. It's also the closest program to home. It's also a program he's been to the most. It's also a program that, had a first-round draft pick at offensive tackle 2 years ago, even though they didn't recruit him or really develop Darnell Wright with this current staff. It's a program that's in the SEC. There's a lot of things that is actually in Tennessee's favor here. In Tennessee, we need to stop pretending that Tennessee is Vanderbilt. You know what I mean? They're not. Tennessee is a good program. Now, are they on Ohio State's echelon as far as everything is it like for like across the board? Of course not. Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, those are like the biggest programs in the country. But Nebraska was 5-7 a year ago. Nebraska is not going to win 10 games this year. They are not on the verge of making the college football playoff. If he picked Nebraska, I would think it has to be because the Cornhuskers went so far over the top with NIL that Ohio State and Tennessee both said, you know what, screw it, we're not going that far. If he picks Tennessee over Ohio State, and I'm not suggesting that that's happening, I'm not suggesting it's not happening, but I think the Ohio State-Tennessee conversation is much more even than people want to believe, especially heading into the 12-team playoff era.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a fair point. The NFL draft results and that kind of stuff speaks differently on that, I think. But I don't know, just brushing the NIL to the side real quick, 1 second. Wasn't there something, was it like the major, was he wanting to be a doctor or something that was kind of working in Ohio State's favor? There was a relationship with Paris Johnson, but then I don't know. I thought there was something like academic, like wanting to get into a better med school or something. I don't know. Maybe you don't know either. I'm just thinking out loud.
I've heard that. I don't think that it matters long term. I don't think David Sanders, if life goes the way David Sanders expects it to over the next 3 years, I don't think he's declaring for the NFL draft and then putting it off to go to medical school. He can go to Ohio State's medical school 20 years from now after he retires from the NFL if he wants. That's not going to matter. And again, this is not to badmouth Tennessee or Nebraska, but if you're talking about if the academics are a concern, those schools are not really going to be in the mix.
Valid point.
So I think that you do have to maybe put some credence into what we heard and what we read months and months ago about David Sanders, and that the family does prefer to stay closer to home. And Tennessee, even though Knoxville is not like an hour away from Charlotte, it is still the closest drive. There's some discussion about living arrangements and all these other things that are maybe being included in the NIL. And if you're a family that's going to see your son play football every weekend and you can drive a relatively short drive and you have a nice house to go to where your family and friends who are in town can visit, then, those are little pieces of this puzzle that have to be sorted out from an Ohio State perspective if they want to compete, because I don't think it's always just necessarily about dollar amount. Like there's other things that get included and other parts of these NIL packages. And let's stop calling them NIL packages. I guess it's just inducements. So there's other pieces that have to be met and matched. And so I think from an Ohio State standpoint, you're looking at it all and you're saying dollar for dollar, I don't think Ohio State's going to be outbid again, unless I've read somewhere Nebraska had someone, a random anonymous donor donate $3+ million to their NIL over the weekend or something. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's the internet. You don't know if anything's true. And if that's the case, and all of a sudden they come in and say, hey, we're going to pay you $3+ million a year, I don't think either Ohio State or Tennessee is going to match that. And they'd be dumb to, in my opinion. But from an Ohio State standpoint, the problem here is that there's no backup plan for David Sanders. It is David Sanders or bust at offensive tackle to round out this class. And, the discussion about 3 or 4 offensive linemen is somewhat irrelevant if David Sanders is not one of them. If David Sanders is not in this class, Ohio State is going to have to be super, super aggressive in the transfer portal to get a high level offensive tackle to come in and play next year, because Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer will both likely be gone. Yes, Simmons can come back for another year, but that's not going to happen because he's going to be a day 2 pick in the NFL. So the problem here is what we talked about 6 weeks ago. And it's that Justin Fry's net is not being cast nearly wide enough. And from an Ohio State recruiting perspective, they got started way late on guys like Jackson Lloyd and players that they really could have made some hay with had they been more involved early. I don't want to sit here and try to suggest that Justin Fry is not doing or has not done a good job in the David Sanders recruitment, because 5 months ago, nobody thought Ohio State was even in the conversation. And here we are at the goal line where it's, mano a mano versus Tennessee. So clearly they've done a good job. The question is, how do you push the ball over the goal line? And that is what they're going to have to sort out over these next 2 weeks. But people who are wondering or thinking, oh, this is over, can we please learn a little bit from how people reacted to news of Riley Pettijohn 5 days before his commitment and things that happened on social media. What you see is not always what's actually happening. What you hear, what you fear is not always reality. So let's just take a step back, let the Ohio State coaching staff and their NIL people do what they have to do over these next 3 weeks without going on social media and demanding heads be chopped off when nothing has happened yet. That's all I'm saying. Am I wrong about that? I'm probably wrong. I know people are going to be mad about it. I'm not trying to defend Justin Fry here. I understand people being mad, but nothing has changed. There's ostensibly been nothing. There's nothing different in the David Sanders recruitment today than there was prior to the Nebraska and Tennessee trips. The only difference is how Ohio State fans are feeling about it because he went to Tennessee. So what else has really changed?
I don't think anything has changed. I guess the final bit for me on this is I do think the effort has been there. I don't know what was going on this past weekend, why they didn't do something, but we can hash that out different time. I just think if he does end up at Tennessee, regardless of the effort that's been put in, it's just going to be extremely hard for the Ohio State fan base to stomach this happening again. Another second place finish for another 4 or 5-star offensive tackle from
100%.
Wherever in the country. So
100%. It should be viewed as a problem. Like let's not sugar. It is a problem. You have to do a better job expanding your list. But I look at things and talk about offensive line recruiting. We go back even to the class of 2022, right? So that's right when Justin Fry started. The Emil Wagner recruitment. Like there's been problems. It's not just been about guys from around the country. Like the Buckeyes have been slow to move on offensive linemen, and that was a problem with Greg Studraro. That's been a problem with Justin Fry. Like they have to expand the net, the period. Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, et cetera. These schools are offering 2 times as many players as Ohio State is at the position. They're hosting 2 times as many players as Ohio State is at the position. If you're only going to sign 10, 12% of the guys that take an official visit, then you better have a much bigger net that you're trying to draw a fish from. So that's where I come into this perspective. I know how people view Justin Fry on the outside, but I also know how people view him on the inside. I know how recruits and their families view him, and those two things are not the same. So the fan base's reaction is based entirely on results, which is 100% understandable. But his peers, the other coaches, the way that recruits and their families, et cetera, view him is based on process, and the process is not a problem. The results are a problem. So the way you make the results better is by expanding what you're doing to a larger pool of candidates, because that right now to me seems to be the problem. But again, nothing has happened, and it's not. Don't take Tennessee having a little momentum here because they got a visit as a sign that the world is ending, because it's not. Take a deep breath, let these next couple weeks play out, and we'll see where things fall. It may very well fall that he picks Tennessee. And if that does happen, people have every right to be pissed off because you miss on another really important prospect. But it is not going to be for lack of effort from Ohio State's coaching staff, and it's certainly not going to be from a lack of effort on the NIL side. So, it's not great news, but it's not bad news either. It's just stop, drop, open up shop. You know what I mean? Like you just got to take it easy. Let's go to the other stuff.
DMX.
Yeah, every once in a while, because y'all going to make me lose my mind.
Wow.
Up in here. There are other things to worry about. Zahir Mathis visited Penn State again for the second time. Recent defensive tackle commitment, Jarquez Carter, 2 weeks after committing to Ohio State, was back at Florida. Naeem Offord was at Auburn. Zion Grady was back at Auburn. Like, these are bigger issues, but these are bigger things to be worried about because these are actually players were committed in the top ranked class in the country. But outside of Zahir Mathis, there's not a lot of concern from the Ohio State side of things. And even with Zahir Mathis, Andrew, there's not like a lot of concern. It's just like more, I would couch it more as irritation. The first visit that he took to Penn State in June was an official visit. And it's like, he's taken his official visit to Ohio State in the fall. Why was he the only commitment that didn't take an official visit this summer? That is somewhat open for interpretation. From what I heard initially is that Ohio State was waiting to make sure that some off the field Academic stuff, we're all in line, but I mean, he was able to take a visit to Penn State, so clearly it wasn't a conference issue. Maybe that's not the issue at all. That's just something I was told. Beyond that, the return visit that he took this past weekend was with a bunch of teammates from Imhotep Charter in Philadelphia. In Ohio State's perspective is, okay, it's fine. He's taking visits with teammates. Players do that all the time, especially when they're close. That said, I've had multiple and different sources in the East Coast and the Philadelphia area who've said essentially that when NIL gets sorted out at Penn State, that Zahir Mathis is going to flip, and it's not even really, it's sort of an open secret in the area that they're just waiting for Penn State's collectives to get their crap together, and then it will be a done deal. So I don't really know how to take that. I think it's obvious that Ohio State really likes Zahir Mathis and has for a long time, because he's been committed a long time. He was the first defensive lineman committed in this class, and it's a class where you need 3 or 4 defensive ends. So like we can slough it off and say, oh, it's fine. He's a project. He's got body, weight issues. He needs to gain weight. He needs to get bigger, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is that you need him in this class, because you need not only super high-end talent in this class, and he does have a lot of upside, but you also need depth in this class. And so it's not just as simple as replacing someone if he decides to go to Penn State. Nothing is like happening in the immediate future, but it does put some pressure on Ohio State when he does take that official visit this fall.
Yeah, that one is the one that just seems like it's worth watching. I don't know what the deal is with why he's made so few trips to Ohio State and so many to Penn State. Obviously, the proximity is one thing, but I don't know, just something has felt off about that one for a while. I guess on the other side of the coin, like, this isn't one of those classes where Larry Johnson has absolutely nobody committed and losing this kid would be, catastrophic. I think he's a good player, like the measurables and all that kind of stuff, maybe a little bit underweight. But yeah, something just feels off about that one. So I guess, if he does make it back to Columbus this fall, like you said, that's going to be a very important trip.
Yeah. What feels off, and I don't want to call out any specific people, but there is at least a notion that there are people in the Imhotep program that have very good relationships at Penn State that would prefer he goes there. He comes from a difficult background. He is not in a situation where he has a lot of means to travel. So he's reliant on people who are around the program to take him places. And they're much more willing and likely to take him to Penn State than they are to Columbus because of the length of that drive. So it's not a situation where Larry Johnson is apathetic or anything like that. They want him in this class. The relationship between Johnson and Alan Clark and Zahir Mathis remains very strong. I don't know if there's a really great relationship with Mathis and the rest of the Ohio State staff or the Ohio State commits, because he's just pretty reclusive. And again, his situation there in Philadelphia is not great from a personal perspective. So it's about finding a way to make sure that he's taken care of. And Ohio State, views him very highly. He's the number 2 ranked weak side edge defender according to rivals.com. So like, he's got a lofty recruiting profile. And I think that maybe Penn State, what their assumption is, number one, Penn State, I think they've got commitments from only 2 of the top 10 players in the state of Pennsylvania, maybe 3. So it's important to them to make sure that they win that battle, because you can't keep losing your best players to Ohio State and Georgia and even like Missouri in this class. So they're pushing hard. And I think that their belief is that they will prioritize him more on the NIL front than Ohio State will. And I guess we'll see if that happens. Because for people, in that conversation, Penn State feels like they can maybe be a bit more aggressive, or are willing to be more aggressive, because they look at Ohio State's class and think, well, the Buckeyes are going to have to deal with so-and-so, and money is not forever. So any of the other commitments visiting elsewhere this weekend that had you concerned?
Not really. It just seems like Naeem Offord is going to keep visiting places. And I think I even saw one of the Auburn writers say, like, it's just a matter of them trying to chip away to, make it a possibility even. The Jarquez Carter thing, I I admittedly still don't know a ton about him. I know he's been committed for a few weeks now, and maybe it's a little weird to make that trip right after you commit to Ohio State. But again, proximity to home. So who knows?
Yeah. And again, recruiting in 2024, I don't blame any kid who is continuing to make decisions to look elsewhere. Like, to be honest, as you look at Ohio State's future here, there are a lot of people, even in the Ohio State fan base, who think that Ryan Day needs to be fired if they don't beat Michigan this year. So, like, it makes sense to have backup plans. That's what TJ Alford was doing. That's what I believe Jarquez Carter is doing. Naeem Offord certainly looking at other opportunities to make sure if things go haywire for any number of reasons that he's got a plan. So that is the simple truth of where things stand. It doesn't mean that these kids are doing anything wrong. Ohio State certainly, and Ohio State fans are certainly not griping when Malik Autry visits Ohio State. So you have to sort of take the good and take the bad. You take them both. And there you have the facts of recruiting in 2024. Chris Henry Jr. visited Oregon this weekend. That's one I think that, the longer his recruitment goes on, the longer the time and distance from Ohio gets, the more that you're going to hear about him in other schools. I insist that people view this the same way they viewed the Jeremiah Smith recruitment, and that's if Brian Hartline and Ryan Day are at Ohio State, Chris Henry Jr. is going to be. And I don't think he's going to reclassify. Let me get that out. Let me get out in front of that. There has been some discussion about it. Talking to people this week, I don't think that's going to happen, which from an Ohio State standpoint, like you'd almost like it to, because you'd prefer to close that window for other schools to chip away. But it's probably not in anyone's best interest to reclassify, especially when you're that young. So it's just going to be a long haul recruitment.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. If he wants to take another year of getting paid like probably $5 or $10K just to make an unofficial visit to certain schools on the West Coast, I mean, I guess that'll help his wallet a little bit, I guess.
I was told, and again, these are things that there's no way to confirm or deny them, really. I mean, I guess everyone will deny them, but there's no way to confirm that they're true. I was told that one Ohio State commitment was offered almost $50,000 to visit Oregon for their barbecue this past weekend. How do you say no to that?
You don't. You just go eat some barbecue,
right?
Take the money and do whatever with it.
If you consider that player did say no but still visited elsewhere, then again, I don't know how much of this is true. I want to always preface, because the internet is full of rumor and the night is dark and full of terrors. But these numbers don't get pulled out of nowhere. So there's certainly the idea, what Gene Smith said a year ago is that people are getting paid $5,000 for visits. If that's what was known publicly, then you can just assume it's more privately. So there's not a lot really to talk about in the class of 2025 right now for Ohio State. They have 24 commitments. They have the number one class in the country. There are 4 or 5 players who are going to be making decisions in the next month that we need to pay attention to. There's one player in Preston Bowman that we need to pay attention to in Ohio. And then it's really about what's left and where do the Buckeyes turn. We talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago on the last episode of Talking Stuff. We broke down the needs per position. But Andrew, I just want to give you a chance here. What are your biggest remaining questions about 2025, and where, how can I try to brush your hair?
I guess the third running back, not the most important thing going right now. Obviously, left tackle is the most important thing. We talked about that already. But we talked a little bit about Shakai Mills-Knight possibly visiting at the end of July. Is that what the timeline we had talked about? Am I remembering correctly?
That's what was initially rumored. I talked to people about a week ago, and they said that was not going to happen. I don't know if it means he's not going to visit in the fall, but clearly, even though he was a visit or an offer that was made the second day of Carlos Laughlin's tenure at Ohio State, he still never visited. So it's not something that's moving down the road, I don't think. Whereas Turbo Rogers, the Alabama commitment, he visited this summer, he's got a plan to return for an official visit. That one seems to be more real. And I think that the primary reason for that is that if you look at Bo Jackson and Isaiah West and Shakai Mills-Knight, those 3 are somewhat similar in style, whereas Turbo Rogers is decidedly different. And I think that the preference would be to have a different style of complement as opposed to what Shakai Mills-Knight, who's a very good running back in his own right. But I think they prefer a smaller back.
Yeah, that makes sense. The Rodgers fit would make more sense. I just don't know how realistic it is to get him out of Alabama's class, especially with the way Kalen DeBoer's recruiting right now. So
they've just added 2 2027 commitments to add Alabama this week. So they're pushing way out into the future. So you brought up Alabama, so I'll go there. We'll skip wide receiver and come back to it about Phillip Bell and Preston Bowman. But I don't want to get hopes up in any way, shape, or form, but I will say that I know for a fact that there has been a continued effort from an Ohio State vantage point to go after Micah DeBose, and they believe that there's at least enough interest there, even though he committed to Alabama a week after visiting Ohio State, that there's at least a good enough relationship and enough reciprocal interest to keep attempting that. So that when you talk about the rest of the offensive line, like that's one where I would just say, like, keep it on the back burner. It may mean nothing, but they're at least still going after him, where that's really not the case with a lot of the other guys that committed elsewhere.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned Phillip Bell already. So he's got a commitment coming up. It's in August.
August 31st.
August 31st. And I'm going to kind of lump him and Messiah Delhomme, obviously the safety, kind of in a similar category here, because a couple weeks ago you had mentioned that you felt if Ohio State pushed for both of those, that they would probably get both of those. So as we sit here now heading into August, do you feel that they're going to, or is that all still very much just up in the air? Going to push is what I'm asking.
As of today, I think Ohio State's effort in the Phillip Bell recruitment is genuine and real and unquestioned. I think that they are the team that is probably the favorite. Here we go, 1 month from the decision. But as far as Messiah Delhomme, I don't think a decision's been made. And the difference here is simple. It comes down to the assistant coach. Like there is at least an argument to be made that Brian Hartline could be fine with the 3 receivers he has committed and maybe bring in one from the transfer portal if you want to have some veteran depth coming in next year. Brian Hartline does not want to use the transfer portal. He does not want to bring in players into his room from the portal. That is clear. He's never brought one in. I don't think he's going to start now. That's not the case at safety, where especially because you will lose Lathan Ransom and you return no real depth that has experience even next year, because we presume that Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom will play 98% of the snaps at safety. So I think Ohio State might be considering bringing in a veteran safety to complement the class as opposed to wide receiver, where Hartline is much more steadfast about wanting to bring in only guys from high school. So I don't think a decision's been made at that point. So the decision is still underway. It's still being, but you've probably got a month. There's no specific date for Delhomme, but I think that, he told me initially he was thinking end of August. So you've still got a couple weeks to figure it out. I wouldn't be surprised though, if that one didn't happen for Ohio State, because I think that they might see more value in adding veteran depth at safety as opposed to a 4th guy from high school, unless that 4th guy ends up being Trey McNutt like 3-4 months from now, because that's not going to happen this week when he commits on Saturday.
So we could be looking at like a Jihad Carter situation for that final safety spot or whatever, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd go after someone that is going to be a starter, as opposed to a depth piece. Like, you will have Malik Hartford, you'll have Jaden Bonsu, you'll have Jalen McClain, et cetera. Some guys coming back that you really like, but people who haven't played much. And so I think you are looking for somebody to come in and be a stalwart for the defense, and a defense that's going to lose a lot of guys after this year. So I think if you can balance it out, then you do. So we'll see. Obviously, the rest of the class, it comes down to defensive tackle, and it's Malik Autry, and it's whether or not Jakeem Stewart reclassifies, which I still wholeheartedly believe he will. And, if you're paying attention to social media, you see a lot of stuff on him, like tagging Ohio State's, coaches. And I've continued to hear the interest from Jakeem Stewart to Ohio State is extremely real, but we'll see. LSU will obviously do everything in their power to make that difficult.
And then a third cornerback, which that the jury is very much still out on that. It seems like I don't even know if we've.
Yeah,
I don't even know who's realistic.
I don't know that there is anyone that's realistic at this point. It is they're going to go into the season here evaluating players around the Midwest and seeing if there's anybody that pops. There, you'd like a third corner because you know you're going to lose Jordan Hancock and Denzel Burke, and you think maybe there's a world where you lose Davis and Igbinosun. But if Igbinosun returns, you don't really need a third corner. But you just it might be a situation where they look at that the same way they do at safety, and you figure out, hey, if Davison has a really like fast start to the 2024 season, and you think all of a sudden maybe he's going to make himself an NFL early entrant candidate, then you get more aggressive. But the financial obligation for Devin Sanchez and Naeem Offord is going to be considerable. And I don't think that you are going to find many other corners around the country that are going to willingly be that third guy to those two, unless you can find someone in Ohio that really steps up, like Jameer Scott, a Wisconsin commit down in Cincinnati, who I really like. I mean, that's a guy that I would personally be watching if I was Ohio State, but it's not a name I've actually heard from them. So that's one I would go after down at Mount Healthy in Cincinnati. I think and Luke Fickell knows defense. And if Luke wants him to play defense, then I think Ohio State should want him to play defense too.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know. I don't got much else for the 2025 class. This is kind of more of a 4-minute offense type of question.
This is a quick hitter show. And, again, we appreciate everyone watching Talking Stuff. It's we know that you want it more often, but I don't feel like it's right to just put together shows where we just don't talk about anything and just say the same things over and over. So
I did want to ask you, like we said, that there's all of Justin Fry's eggs are very much in the David Sanders basket right now. Is there, just for you personally, is there anybody out there, if heaven forbid Tennessee does win out for David Sanders, is there anybody that you even would have like kind of on your watch list? Because they need tackles.
I mean, not really.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
If especially if you look at the top 10, I mean, the Josh Petty conversation is real. He makes his announcement on August 12th. Like, Georgia Tech is surging there, and I think that they're putting all of their financial eggs into one basket because they can't afford to have Josh Petty leave Georgia and go be a backup at Florida State or Ohio State as a freshman, where he could come in and maybe be like the face of the program at Georgia Tech, a school that has a very good academic profile that he's really fond of. I wouldn't be surprised if you see that, but if you look at, I'm looking at the Rivals.com offensive tackle rankings in the class of 2025. David Sanders is number 1. He's uncommitted. Michael Fasusi from Louisville, Texas is number 3. He's uncommitted. He'll commit to Oklahoma or Texas or A&M. I think it's end of this week. Andrew Babalola from Kansas. I've never heard Ohio State mentioned with him. He's number 9. I think Michigan is the favorite there, according to some of their people. Stanford's very involved. Josh Petty, number 11, uncommitted. Nikolai Brooks, number 15 from Iowa, uncommitted, 6'8", almost 400 pounds. Not a player that I think Ohio State would go after, even though he did visit early in the process, and there was some early conversation. Then you go down to number 22, Juan Gaston from Georgia, another 6'8", 330 guy, uncommitted. There's just not a lot of guys out there. If I'm Ohio State, what I would do is watch very closely what happens to Andrew. I'm not sure. He's disappeared. I watch what happens in the recruitment of Avery Gatch, even though that sounds crazy. But if Michigan does get hit by the NCAA with some real penalties, I wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State at least makes a call to Avery Gatch and says, hey, Avery, maybe you want to take another look here. You visited us 6 times and, we really like you. You really like us. Now, that's a stretch, probably. It's hard to imagine that he makes that flip, even with Michigan having some potential NCAA issues. But if that's an issue where that they're either hammered by bowl bans or recruiting losses or, the scholarship cutbacks, etc., it's worth a conversation. That's all I'm saying. Avery Gatch is probably the one that they're closest to. Him and Carter Lowe are good friends. So there's a lot of opportunities to evaluate, and the Buckeyes are going to do that in a major way. But no matter what they do, there's no replacing David Sanders. And that's the lesson here. That's the bottom line. It doesn't matter how good the player is that Ohio State turns to. He's not going to be the prospect that David Sanders is. And that's the unfortunate reality. So we're just going to have to see what happens there. Andrew's laptop died, apparently, is what he said. So he dipped out of here pretty early. And that's unfortunate, but it was the end of the show anyway. So we do appreciate folks bearing with us through all of the trials and tribulations and ups and downs of technology. But that is the way the world works when you're working on the internet. So for this episode of Talking Stuff, I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That was Andrew Ellis. We really do appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time. Fall camp starts for Ohio State on Thursday. Going to be a busy couple days. The dead period starts on Thursday. So not a lot going on recruiting wise, except for these key decisions that will be made over the next month. But we will do our best to keep you apprised of everything you need to know when it comes to Ohio State recruiting. So thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.